Thank you, Claire. Oh, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Please bear with me a moment as I get the PowerPoint set up here. All right, and here we go. So today I'm going to give a brief overview of the National Register program and explain some of the requirements for nominating a property to the register. So the modern historic preservation movement began in 1966 when President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the National Historic Preservation Act. This law was created due to growing concern among the public that too many historic buildings and neighborhoods were being destroyed by urban renewal policies and interstate construction. This act established the National Register program, and it also mandated that each state establish their own historic preservation office and work to document historic properties within their borders. So what is our office? The State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO for short, is a federally mandated agency tasked with documenting West Virginia's historical sites and encouraging their preservation. We work with the public to help nominate properties to the National Register. We promote financial incentives for historic preservation, and we also review government-funded projects to make sure they have as minimal of a negative effect as possible on historical sites. Contrary to what some might think, our office does not have the power to delay or block construction projects or demolition activities that affect historic properties. We merely have the power to comment on these projects and strongly encourage people not to destroy these properties. So exactly what is the National Register of Historic Places? It is the official list of sites and districts across the United States that have been deemed historically significant by the federal government and worthy of preservation. It is administered by the National Park Service within the Department of the Interior. Today, there are around 100,000 National Register listings around the entire country, encompassing about 2 million individual resources. A resource can be any building, outbuilding, store, site, any physical built thing. In West Virginia, there are approximately 1,100 National Register listings, encompassing some 24,000 individual resources. There are many misconceptions about what a National Register nomination means for your property. Here are some of the things that the National Register does do. It provides national recognition and prestige for a property, basically just an honorary thing. It provides limited protection from government-funded projects that could negatively impact the property. Owners of such properties become eligible to apply for grants to preserve the property, both through our office and other organizations. And property owners also become eligible to apply for historic rehabilitation tax credits, which can help subsidize renovation work on your property. What National Register listing does not do for your property, contrary to popular belief, there are no infringements on a person's property rights when your property is put on the National Register. It does not restrict the use or sale of a property. It does not require that you continue to maintain the property. It doesn't require that you open it up to the public for viewing and whatnot. It doesn't guarantee funding for restoration or perpetual maintenance. Financial opportunities are available, but they're not guaranteed. It does not protect properties from demolition. and it does not provide a historical marker for the property either. Now, these only apply on the state and federal level. There are some municipalities around the state that have historic landmarks commissions with the power to regulate how people treat their historic properties. Places like certain parts of Charleston, Charlestown, Wheeling. If you want to make changes to your building, you have to get a permit from those cities. But on the state and federal government levels, there are no restrictions on what can be done. Although if you are receiving a grant or a tax credit from our office, we do have a say in what work you're doing with that money we give you. So what is SHPO's role in the National Register program? Our job is to evaluate properties and determine if they are eligible for the National Register. We commission surveys to identify eligible sites across the state. We help people write successful National Register nominations from time to time. We serve as the liaison between the public and the National Park Service during the nomination process. So if you want to nominate a property, you go to us, not the Park Service. And as mentioned earlier, we distribute grants and tax credits to help encourage the preservation of National Register properties. Now, there are a series of specific requirements a property must meet in order to be listed on the National Register. In most circumstances, the property must be at least 50 years old. It must retain historic integrity, which we define as the ability of a site to convey its historic significance. If a property has been heavily altered over time, that can negatively impact its eligibility. These alterations can include covering wood siding with new vinyl siding, replacing original windows with ones that are a different shape or type, enclosing a front porch, building an addition to the side or the front, changing the shape of your roof, and so forth. The more detrimental alterations you make to a property, the more difficult it will be to place it on the National Register. How much integrity you need for a property to be eligible it can be a bit subjective, and it depends on different circumstances. One good example of integrity is the Dunlow Depot in the background here. While the building has experienced some deterioration, it still has all of its original materials. The wood siding is original. The doors are original. The windows, even though they're boarded up, are still original. The old chimney is still there. And the metal roof is probably a replacement, but it is similar enough to what the original roof would have looked like. You also need owner consent, of course. If they don't want their property listed, you can't really force the listing upon them. That would be problematic. And finally, the property must meet at least one of 4 different criteria for eligibility that have been established by the National Park Service. These are categories to help explain why a property is significant and deserves being preserved. You can't just nominate grandma's house because it's old and you think it's important. It has to be connected to an important historical topic of some sort. Grandma's house might be eligible because it's important to the local history of architecture, if it's a very well-designed house. Or if it's located on an old farm, it could be important to the local history of agriculture. So attaching a specific historical theme to your property is key to getting it nominated. And I'll give a brief rundown of each of these 4 criteria. A, B, C, and D. So first, we have criterion A. These are properties that are connected to a historic event, a historic pattern, or a historic trend. This is a pretty broad category and can include many different topics, such as the history of transportation, agriculture, commerce, industry, politics, and so forth. This criteria can be rather straightforward. An old store might be eligible under criterion A for its connection to the commercial history of a small town. A Civil War battlefield would be eligible under A for its connection to military history. And here are a few good examples of criterion A nominations. And we have the Wakeville School in Monroe County listed just a year ago. It was nominated for its connection to the history of education in Monroe County during the mid-1900s. It was an example of smaller one-room schoolhouses being consolidated into these simple medium-sized buildings before even larger scale consolidation in the later 1900s. We have the James Osborne Farm in Jefferson County. It was listed for its connection to the history of agriculture in the Eastern Panhandle during the 1800s. It was also listed for military history because it was one of the key flashpoints during the 1862 Battle of Shepherdstown in the Civil War. There's even a cannonball still embedded in the brick wall on one side of the house. And I should note, it is possible to nominate a property under more than one of the criteria or more than one historical topic. You just have to have at least one for it to become listed. And we have the National Bank of Davis in Tucker County. It was listed for its connection to the history of commerce in the small town of Davis. Next, we have criterion B. This is for properties that are associated with a historically significant person or people, preferably during the time period of their career or the most productive part of their life. In most cases, criterion B nominations are the homes or workplaces of important individuals. A few examples, such as here we have the William Henry Edwards House in Coburg. Edwards was a successful coal baron in the 1800s and also an amateur entomologist. He was widely considered to be one of the world's experts on butterflies in the 19th century, and he published a very popular encyclopedia, an illustrated encyclopedia, on North American butterflies. And this is the Elizabeth Hardin Gilmore House in Charleston. Gilmore owned and operated an African-American mortuary inside this house during a time when white-owned funeral homes wouldn't accept Black clients. And so this was a very important business to have for Black communities during segregation. Gilmore was also a very influential civil rights activist in the local community and led a successful sit-in at a segregated department store lunch counter to help integrate it. And we have the Cap Hatfield gravesite in Logan County. Cap Hatfield was the son of Devil Anse Hatfield and one of the key figures in the Hatfield-McCoy feud. Now, the graves of individual people are usually not eligible for the National Register. In fact, they're extremely rare. This is the only grave site in the whole state that's listed, to our knowledge. But there is a loophole where you can nominate a grave if the person is exceptionally significant and if there are no other surviving sites associated with them. In this case, there are no existing buildings connected to Cap Hatfield that still survive. His house is gone, his father's house is gone, his law office in Logan is gone, and all we have left of it is his gravesite. But it's an extremely rare circumstance for that to occur. Then we have criterion C. This is for properties that represent an important historic architectural style, an important engineering technique, a landscape design, and artistic work, the product of a master designer, and so forth. This is probably the most common criteria that National Register properties are listed under. If you can find the history of your house, but it has a very good architectural style, then you can just easily list it underneath that. That's happened quite a lot over the years. Criterion C can apply to homes and buildings, public artworks, sculptures and monuments, bridges, tunnels and dams, and parks, cemeteries, and other designed landscapes. Like here, we have the Henry and Julia Hoard Stark House in Cerrito. It was listed under Criterion C because it is an excellent and well-preserved example of high-style colonial revival architecture in Wayne County. Most of its original features are still intact, and it's just a great representation of colonial revival architecture. The Wheeling Suspension Bridge was listed for its connection to the history of engineering because of the pioneering bridge building techniques used to construct it in the 1840s. In fact, during its first 3 years of operation, this was the longest suspension bridge in the world. The Marshall University Memorial Fountain in Huntington was listed for its connection to the history of art as an important public sculpture created by the world-famous abstract artist Harry Bertoia. It's one of only a handful of public art pieces on the National Register in West Virginia. Most of the others are just war memorials, so this is even more rare. In fact, I believe it's the only piece of abstract art in the state that's on the National Register. Finally, we have Criterion D. This is for properties that have the potential to yield new information on important historical topics. In most cases, Criterion D is used for archaeological sites. These sites don't necessarily have to be excavated before being nominated. As long as you can reasonably demonstrate that there are artifacts and resources buried at a site that can provide important information on something historic, then the site can be nominated. Criterion D nominations in West Virginia usually include Native American sites, such as burial mounds, and we have the Grave Creek Mound here in the background. Military forts, especially from the colonial era and the Civil War era. Sites of former coal camps and company towns, and sometimes cemeteries, especially if they're unmarked or they have some important event connected to them. One example is the Nettleburg Coal Mining Complex in the New River Gorge National Park. This site contains many ruins and foundations of buildings and coal mining infrastructure. And studying these remains helps shed light on the operations of coal company towns in the early 1900s. Another one is the Blair Mountain Battlefield back in Logan County. This was the site of the 1921 Battle of Blair Mountain between Union coal miners and local police forces, which was a widely covered event nationwide. The mountain landscape contains some remnants of many trenches, as well as buried artifacts like bullet casings, abandoned guns, and other little trinkets. These sources can help provide information on how the Battle of Blair Mountain unfolded and where the major flashpoints occurred. So now you have a basic idea of the National Register program. How do you get started with nominating a property? Well, our office does have a free handbook called How to Prepare National Register Nominations in West Virginia. It's a fairly comprehensive guide. It provides step-by-step directions for every phase of the nomination process from beginning to end, so quite helpful. It's available for free on our website. You can go online and read it, download it, or print out copies for your personal use. We're also happy to email you a copy or ship you a hard copy if you prefer. Once you have studied the guide, contact our office. Make sure we're on the same page with it. Um, it's very helpful to talk to us before you go writing a nomination, just in case there are some problems or we don't think it's eligible, or even if it turns out to already be listed. You don't want to do all that work for nothing. Um, Usually, when you talk to us, we request that you provide us with some information to give us an idea as to whether the property you have in mind is eligible for the National Register. Often we'll ask you to submit what we call a historic property inventory form. This is just a brief 2 or 3 page fact sheet that you'll record basic information on about a property's history, location, and current condition. You also need to send us some high quality photos of the property so we can have a good idea of what it currently looks like, what its current condition is. Sometimes if time allows, we do request to conduct a site visit if necessary, just to get a better idea of the feel and the condition of the property, although that's not always the case. Assuming that we determine that the property is eligible to be listed, you will then proceed to fill out the National Register nomination form. This is a complete template available on a Microsoft Word document format that we will send to you if you're ready to move forward with the next step. It may seem daunting and complicated, but it's really not that bad if you break it down piece by piece and just work on it step by step on your own time. And here's some things you will need when writing a nomination. This is critical: owner consent. If a property owner objects to a nomination, then the nomination doesn't move forward. The Park Service and our office have to reject it. So before you go to all the work of writing a nomination, make sure the owner is cool with it. Now, the situation is different for historic districts, which encompass multiple properties and multiple property owners. In that case, if more than half of all the property owners within a district object to a nomination, the nomination doesn't move forward. If some people object, but they make up less than half of the property owners, the nomination will still be approved, including their properties. It's just a brute democracy. You'll need some information about the property's location. This includes the address, the coordinates, a USGS map that depicts the location of the property, and boundary lines. It's really helpful to have a map or a site plan or a sketch of the site with the boundaries of the nomination drawn. Usually you can just stick with the legal property boundaries, or if it's encompassing multiple property parcels or there's some other situation, you may have to draw the boundary lines differently. You will need to write a thorough description of the building and its setting. So discuss the building's materials, the building's design, architectural features, size, shape, form, and massing, any noteworthy aspects of it, and just the surrounding environments, like where is it located? Is it on a farm? Is it in a suburban neighborhood? Is it downtown? Describe what's all around it. And you will need to write a good history of the property, including background information, the date of construction, any important events that occurred here, the ownership chain if possible, and any known alterations to the building or site. That's pretty important. Information you provide in the nomination will need to be cited. You will have to include a bibliography at the end of the document, listing all the sources you consulted for this project. This can include newspaper articles, books, interviews you conducted with people, and property records. Anything you looked at to glean information on the property, you should mark down for us. And finally, we need good current photos of the property, preferably taken on a digital camera or a high-quality smartphone. Make sure they're not blurry or grainy or taken through a window or from your car. We don't accept print copies of pictures anymore. More specifications about the photo guidelines are in the handbook, or you can just email us and ask about it. Now, the most important part of every nomination form is the statement of significance. This is where you write the history of the property and make your argument for why this history makes the site eligible for the National Register. So it's a full-on narrative history. Think of this as one of those persuasive essays that you wrote in high school that no one likes to do, or well, some of you might like to do, I don't know. Tell us why this place is important and why should we care about it, and importantly, back up your argument with some evidence. You know, there's really no set length, no minimum for how big the narrative should be. Some nominations get by with a few pages of content. Others are basically like a master's thesis. They're dozens and dozens of pages. We've had some that are over 100 pages of content. So really, it just depends on how much information we need to know and how many words you need to get your point across and make your argument successful. So I am going to share with you some excerpts from my statement of significance for the Marshall Memorial Fountain, which I wrote about a year ago now. I began at the bottom here with a statement of significance summary paragraph, where I briefly outlined the entire history and argument for the nomination. My first sentence introduces the topic just by stating the point outright, that the fountain is eligible under criterion C for its association with art history. I then have a couple sentences summarizing the history of the Marshall University plane crash and the fountain's creation. I then conclude by stating the period of significance for the property. In this case, the period is 1972, the year that the fountain was created. It's always important in a nomination to have a set period of significance, just a time period for when the site did whatever it was that made it important. If you're listing a prominent drugstore, for example, and it was in operation from 1900 to its closure in 1950, then the period you would put on the nomination form is 1900 to 1950. Now, after the introduction, I proceeded with dividing the narrative into different sections to help make the argument more cohesive. I'm going to start off with a little bit of background history of the nomination. In a single paragraph, I describe the history of Marshall University from its beginning in 1970, from its beginnings in 1837 until the 1970 plane crash. Background history doesn't have to be too long. In this case, I just made it 1 or 2 paragraphs. How much you need to add for your background really just depends on the thing that being nominated and just the circumstances surrounding it. After the introduction, I proceeded with a little, whoops, wrong page. After that, I provided some more information with historic context on the fountain by describing the history of the plane crash. I didn't go too in-depth onto the subject of the plane crash, but just enough to illustrate the significant impact of the event on Marshall and the Huntington community. Then I provided some specific history on the creation of the memorial fountain itself. This part should be the most detailed portion of the significant statement. because you're focusing more on the actual thing being nominated. After that, I followed up with a brief summary of the fountain's impact since its creation in 1972. And this is helpful because it demonstrates the important influence that the fountain has had on Marshall University over the years. It mentions how the fountain became popular among the student body over time, how it became a popular meeting site, and was even used as a background for filming of the We Are Marshall movie in 2006. And finally, I include a little bit of background information about the creator, Harry Bertoia. This sheds some light on the artistic design of the fountain and helps to bolster the significance of the fountain by depicting its connection to a famous artist. By explaining how important and well-known Bertoia was, and noting some other examples of his work, it helped to emphasize how important the Marshall Fountain was because of this connection to him. Now, let's recap with a timeline for listing. The amount of time it takes to nominate a property from beginning to end can vary widely. 6 months to a year is often what we see. In rare cases, we have nominations done in just a few months, although that is pretty rare. And then other times it can take multiple years. It just depends on how much time the nominator has and if there's any problems with revising the document or things of that nature. So the first step, someone contacts SHPO about a potential nomination project. So you reach out to us, you can call or email, or I suppose write us a letter, although we don't get those too often nowadays. And just talk to us about your idea and we'll help walk you through it and see if it seems like a viable project. SHPO will then evaluate the site to determine if it meets the eligibility requirements for the National Register. This might require us to ask for more information from you and maybe to conduct a site visit of the property too. Next, the nominator works on writing the nomination form. And this obviously is the most time-consuming part of the process. Whenever you're done writing a draft of the nomination, you send it directly to our office for review. And we have up to 60 days to review each draft, although we try and get it to you in a shorter amount of time. It just depends on how big the document is and how busy it is. So we will review the document, write comments and send back to you, make recommendations for edits. Sometimes we make revisions ourselves if time permits and if they're not really major revisions. And then if you send us a second draft, we review it all over again. We do the 60 days all over again, and that just goes back and forth until finally we have a final draft that we think is good enough to be approved by the Park Service. Now, assuming the nomination draft is good enough and we give it the green light, we then schedule the nomination to be presented at a meeting of the West Virginia Archives and History Commission. They are a nonpartisan body that meets 3 times a year to review and vote on nominations. And the nominator is required to attend these meetings and give a presentation in person on the nomination. The commissioners will have already read the nomination by this time, or they're supposed to have. But you being there in person and talking about it will help them with their decision-making process, and also so they can ask you any questions if need be. Assuming the commission votes to approve a nomination, SHPO then sends the nomination to the National Park Service for their final approval. They have up to 45 days legally to review the nomination, and they can choose to either approve, reject, or request revisions to a nomination. Usually they approve. Occasionally they'll send us back one to revise, and they haven't rejected one outright, at least not since I've been here. which hasn't been very long, frankly. And then once the National Park Service approves a nomination, the property is officially considered listed on the National Register. We notify property owners and local officials, we send out a little certificate, and everyone lives happily ever after, hopefully. So in conclusion, a National Register nomination can take a good deal of time and effort, but anyone with the right commitment can do one. You know, just talk to our office, see how viable the project might be. We'll work with you to the best of our extent, and hopefully we'll try and make it happen. You know, we're always here to assist anyone who wants to pursue a nomination, and we love to see more nominations from the public. And there is some of our contact information. You're welcome to email us, call us, or mail us at any time.